These are the guys who make a lot of the decisions about what you're trying to sell and how you're positioning yourselves into the government. My caution and my advice, and moderators have a clear job. We talk, we keep things flowing, and then we keep quiet. But my advice to all of you is something that I gave a few months ago in the other ballroom for another venue, is really listen to what they're saying. Listen to what their problems are. You heard this morning the DoD and the civilian agencies on what the expectations levels are. But really understand their problem sets and how they're positioning their respective organizations for the future. Don't listen to it with the view of, hey, this is what I need to sell or what my transaction is. Sorry, our job on the vendor side is to solve their problems. And the only way you get to solve their problems is by listening to what their problems are. And I hate to sound pedantic on it, but I spent the morning trying to ratchet back one of your colleagues, in fact, who mispositioned his sales pipeline because he didn't listen. And that happens all the time. So my framing of this is that they all have a really difficult problem set. I mean, we've got the standards bodies. We've got Mr. Gross, who is truly the operator of the most critical infrastructures in the world. We've got healthcare. We have an industry partner. We've got someone who runs the coolest high-performance computing center in the world. And sorry, listen to their problems and try to find the solutions that fit them. So I'm going to start with Paul. The way we're going to frame this up is we're going to go down the line, do some introductions, have everyone give a brief description of what their problems are, what they're doing, and then we will go. We've got some pre-canned questions, and then I'm going to open it up for a whole bunch of other questions. So, Paul?
Great, thank you. Paul Grassi with NIST in Department of Commerce. Is this on? I think it is. I lead our digital identity group, primarily the standards and technology implementations that live underneath the 800 series or 863 series of documents. We've had an exciting shift in organization structure where we've just been recently put in the NCCOE, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. For those that are familiar with that, it may seem like an awkward shift because we've just completed wrapping up some 800 series docs, and now we go to the NCCOE where they're more responsible for building 1800 series special pubs, which are primarily build guides for tough cybersecurity challenges. We're shifting the way we actually do things in at least digital identity as a trial run, where we will leverage the NCCOE as, maybe not the best word, but an incubator for future updates or brand new special pubs. The goal being only put things into production for federal agencies that have been implemented and are implementable. Do not throw Hail Marys in a special pub and then expect agencies to be able to implement those things and let them struggle on their own. So we'll see more of an iteration between the development of special pubs and the development of 1800 series docs to include feeders from industry and international standards organizations. I'm probably more unique than these guys in the sense that I'm not really a buyer of anything, but we are heavily influenced by the private sector and want to remain so. So, my ask or my problem, if you will, it's not really a problem, is to participate in the development of our guidelines. We've doubled down on the fact that our guidelines should be as informed by our federal government partners and our target audience as it is informed by those folks that are delivering those solutions, hopefully delivering those solutions to government agencies. I'm of the mindset that we're not building, we're buying, unless told otherwise, and then we'll adjust our guidelines accordingly. So that's one, participate in the development of our documentation. And if you've followed what we're doing in the identity group, we're doing everything out in the open from blank page to final out on GitHub. So there should be no surprises going forward in terms of what we're doing because the first written word is out there in the public domain. for you all to participate in. And those repositories are wide open for private sector submissions. And during the last drafting of our guidelines, we actually accepted everything the private sector sent us in terms of direct content to the document as well as issues. Real quick, secondarily, the NCCOE is where we actually interact at the keyboard with technologies that are provided by the private sector. So, that's another area where if we want to make progress with really tough cybersecurity issues, and we that's where we build technologies that solve tough cyber problems that haven't been solved today, leveraging open standards. And maybe not, given this iterative approach now, maybe not necessarily based on an SP that's final, but maybe based on an SP that's going to be final in the future. And we only do that with the private sector. So we hope that you'll volunteer and your products will be part of those builds. We are not committed to a single build, so we can have multiple going on at any one time. So if there's competitors in the space, we can pick one product for build one product for build two, and run those in parallel. So there should be ample opportunity to participate there in the near future.
Okay. And then just remember for context, the stuff he's writing has small little cascade effects like FedRAMP. And if any of you are doing commercial and as well as federal sales, the FedRAMP standards are being applied across the whole of industry, not just the federal space. So your chance to influence him starts now.
I'll add to that. I mean, we're violently non-regulatory, but we spend a lot of time with regulators because if we've got a best practice in some discipline in cybersecurity, we certainly want to make that known to the regulators as opposed to letting them go at their own. So we have a lot of conversations with those folks and at the international level. I mean, I'm active on a bi-weekly basis with at least 6 or 7 international partners.
Okay. Mr. Gross.
I am on. I'm Martin Gross. I'm the Director of Network Security Deployment in the Department of Homeland Security. And as Henry asked when I came in, Martin, by your title, I have no idea what you do. So I said, that's really good, Henry. Actually, I'm in charge of acquisition and engineering for the set of cyber capabilities that DHS provides to the department and agencies, enterprise capabilities, and also responsible for some information sharing programs and the delivery of analytical tools to our National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. So basically, I acquire and engineer the capabilities that we use to protect the .gov networks from the enterprise level. It includes basically 3 major programs: National Cybersecurity Protection System, a lot of which people call Einstein, of which really Einstein is only the sensor suite component of that. I run the CDM program, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, the big program that's putting tools and capabilities in place in all the departments and agencies to look at configuration, to look at cyber protection vulnerability. Very big effort. I won't talk more about that because we've got a lot of open solicitations and acquisitions going on right there. And the last one is Enhanced Cybersecurity Program, which is a program to provide private industry with access to top secret indicators that they can use to protect the commercial domain. And that's a program that we've set up to share that type of information to protect the private domain. Rather than talk about specifics, I'd like to talk about sort of 8 themes that I have that have been developed. I've only been in this job for 10 months, came from DOD, but themes that I have seen over my 10 months in dealing with the departments and agencies and my time working as the DH lead on the IT modernization report, which was out for public comment and is being in final adjudication up to the president for signature. So I'd like to talk about some themes.
Hold on, Martin.
Yep.
Okay, this is the part where you all should start writing. Okay, I mean, because when Martin was going over this as we prepped up, I'll be honest, I was scribbling furiously too. So this is the listen intently stage.
Right, and I put these themes out there to provoke thought and discussion of things that we need to have what I would consider intellectual conversations around about how we need to proceed forward from both a government and from an industry perspective. And there are key things that we need to think about as we move forward about how we work together. And that's why I think they're very important. And I think the panelists will add to these as we go along, as we've discussed them before. So the first one is that we need a consistent understanding of threats, vulnerabilities, gaps, and risks, okay? A lot of people and a lot of conversations I have with people confuse and talk about those four things as if they're interchangeable, and they're not interchangeable. We have ways of looking at pieces of those, but we don't have a consistent understanding of how we're going to talk about all four of those things in a consistent framework. We have the NIST framework, we have some other things, some threat frameworks. We need to make sure that we're all talking about these things the same way so that we're not confusing everybody and we can get across to everybody what the issues are that we really have to deal with. The second one is another one of understanding, and that we need to understand and acknowledge our key business and mission threads that cross government industry boundaries that are critical for the nation to operate, okay? It's not just a cyber. It deals with infrastructure protection. It deals with processes and things that for the nation to operate in the digital environment, we need to understand what those things are and what those relationships are and figure out how to protect them as a nation. Very critical. There are things underway that talk about critical infrastructure. They don't necessarily talk about everything that goes on across the whole spectrum between the commercial and government sectors. The third one, I hear a lot of people criticize programs in the government saying you shouldn't be doing X, you shouldn't be doing Y. You should be using my solution, you should be using X solution. My postulate from looking at where we are, we have some initial necessary but not sufficient protections to help us move forward. We need to expand the protections that we have, okay? We need to expand them from all levels of the architecture and go to a defense in-depth process to be able to look at what we need to do, which we don't necessarily have right now. The other key thing is we need to get back to basics. The IT modernization report was put out there as part of cyber because to get to good cyber hygiene, there are some basics that we have to do with IT modernization to get there. If we don't do those basics of IT modernization, there's no way that we can get to a good cyber hygiene posture. So we need to think about that. There is lots of data and information out there. There are tons of it all over the place. What we don't have is a good analytical framework and analytical capability about how we're going to use that data and share that data and make sure that we're all not looking at the same data and doing the same analytics. There needs to be a way of federating SOCs, federating threat intelligence centers, things like that, so that we're all dealing with a consistent set of information, but we're looking at different slices of the problem and not all trying to focus on the same piece of information, which we tend to do. We tend to say that we need to look at everything with the same level of priority. That's not true. I would say that we wouldn't look at administrative networks the same way that we would look at high-value data assets, and that we need to be able to prioritize based on high-value assets and the criticality to the industry, our industry partners, and the criticality to the government and the nation as a whole. And we need to make sure that we prioritize our efforts to protect them above other things. Scalability. A lot of the things that we do right now are human intensive, they are process intensive, and are not going to scale. We need to figure out ways of making capabilities that we have scalable so that we can do more with what we have. Which leads to my next one, and it is a personal goal of mine, that we need a pipeline of workforce people as a national asset. We need to bring people in, we need to train them, we need to make sure that they have the ability to move to different places as national assets, because if you look at us compared to other nations who have tons of people through a cyber pipeline, computer science pipeline, we need to get to a place where we're getting people into that pipeline at a young age and getting them through so that we have the resources necessary to do what we need. We need to increase public-private partnerships, very key. And the last one, two sort of key gaps from a technology perspective, and I'm not sure they're gaps, but areas that we need to expand on. One is digital identity. You've heard briefly about that. It's critical. We're not going to be able to rely on Social Security number or any other number, so there's got to be a way for a person to control their identity, control access to their information. And the last one is the whole life cycle of data protection. There are a lot of solutions out there for individual components of data protection. We need to figure out the life cycle approach of how we protect data from a life cycle perspective and how we get common APIs and capabilities in place at the data level to protect data. I think that's a good start.
Yeah.
So I find myself sitting here shaking my head a lot, so I think those are really great points. So as the Deputy CIO for NOAA, I'm responsible for the operations of our enterprise IT services, which includes cybersecurity services. NOAA is an agency that enriches life through science. Our reach goes from the surface of the sun to the bottom of the ocean. Our intent is to keep citizens informed of changes in the environment around them so that they can make wise decisions about what they're going to pack in their kids' lunch today. Do they need an umbrella or a raincoat, or is there a tornado that's forming that they need to seek shelter from? The information is essential for protecting life and property. So you've heard from the framework perspective and standards, and we've got DHS who's established a great program for getting tools and solutions in the agency's hands so that we can go out and protect ourselves. You're hearing from an operator now, somebody that every day is concerned about, is our data available? Is the integrity of that data right, so that people can make good decisions with it? Other agencies may be focused in different areas. They may be very concerned about confidentiality of data and not so concerned about its availability. But for NOAA, it's availability and integrity. Technology enables our mission, and on any given day, our workforce is out there collecting, processing, analyzing, and disseminating information. We do that from a variety of sensors and platforms. We have ships and planes and satellites, autonomous vehicles, buoys, even whales have been used to provide information, and balloons. So we have a variety of ways that we bring information in. So imagine trying to put in place a process, an infrastructure to get the information to you in a secure way, and then disseminate it in a secure way. NOAA, I think, experienced the Internet of Things long before the term was ever created. We've had an Internet of Things for a long time. Data sharing is a valuable part of the scientific method, and that sometimes can be at odds with protecting information. A scientist thinks about, how do I get information, how do I share information to further research and to collaborate. That's a real challenge for both IT and for cybersecurity. We seek to get information from a wide variety of sources, not only produced by NOAA. We work with other nations to get information from their satellites. Some of those nations aren't necessarily our friends. So how do we get that information in a secure way and make sure that we can ingest it into our models to fill in gaps that we might have in observations? It's a big challenge for us. So the demand for NOAA's data continues to grow, and just as an example day, if you think back to September the 9th of this year, there was a lot going on. We had two hurricanes, there were three Atlantic hurricanes. Two of them were about to make landfall. Irma was was approaching Florida. We had a Mexico earthquake that caused a tsunami warning to go out that NOAA issued, and we were monitoring for tsunamis. We had a G4 geomagnetic storm occurring, which is the most severe type of geomagnetic storm that was observed by our Discover satellite. And we were also providing weather information to the Northwest Pacific firefighters that were trying to address the wildfire outbreaks in the Northwest. So this all kind of summed up to be our busiest web day that we'd ever observed. We had over 1.1 billion hits on our websites that day. So the bottom line is, we don't get a second chance to issue a warning for a tornado that's going to affect a community. We have to get it right the first time, it has to be timely, and it has to give people time to respond. So protecting our mission is very, very critical to us.
Great, thank you. I'm Stephen Hernandez. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. HHS is a big animal. We have just south of 200,000 employees, give or take. My organization, the Office of Inspector General, is responsible for overseeing the $1 trillion portfolio that is HHS for fraud, waste, and abuse. We have about 750 federal law enforcement agents, guns, badges, all that fun toys. And then also we have about 750 auditors. And then the complement is made up of about 150 attorneys and then support personnel, including the information security staff in my CIO shop. What this means is if you do the math, $1 trillion portfolio with about just south of 1,700 folks, we have to be very good at what we do. And our leadership has always been focused on leveraging technology as a force multiplier. We may not have a lot of people, but the work they're going to do is going to be powerful, it's going to be meaningful, and we're going to recover hundreds of millions of dollars with a very small team. And we've done this numerous times, and IT has always been the leveraging fulcrum that we've pressed on to make that successful. As we move forward, we're also one of the most aggressive adopters of new technology in the agency. We went headfirst into cloud before pretty much anyone else in the agency did. We're leveraging new management methodologies. And on top of all of this, security is paramount to everything we do. We hold a trust position of advisor, of overseer, of law enforcement in the federal government, and we can never afford to have that trust be questioned or violated. So everything that we buy, everything that we employ, everything we operate, the security and resilience of those deployments have to be beyond reproach, and it's my job to make sure that happens. So when we get to the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the distinct challenges that we face and we see in the marketplace and how your role in that fills in. Thank you.
Excellent. My name is Dan Wiley, and I head the incident response team at Checkpoint Software Technologies. So I get to see the worst of the worst when everything else falls apart. Our team is also participating significantly in the conversation to bring the 8 points that Martin was just discussing and all the other security controls that everyone was talking to the market. And one of the things I'll say is that we really do get to see the worst of the worst. Just this morning, we handled 7 DDoS attacks across the world, about 38 malware attacks that impacted multiple people, like at a minimum has to impact like 1,000 people for us to give you the stat. Around the world, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So from a global perspective, it's a hell of a challenge to be able to deal with the threats that are dynamic, moving incredibly fast, and then be able to create controls that actually can make a difference to these attacks. So one of the big takeaways I have for everyone in the room is really listen to these guys, right? Because they're telling you hints on where they've had incidents before, and they need solutions to be able to deal with these incidents. It's as simple as that. So it's really, really important, and I'll take the more vendor approach here since I'm not part of the government anymore, and I'll put my vendor hat on, is be very careful how you sell into these environments. Pay attention. Don't lead with a technology, lead with a solution to their problems. Look at the headlines, see what industry they operate in, understand what's actually impacting them and how you can make a difference to the conversation. So in the panel here, we've got standards, we've got DHS, we've got weather, we've got health. Each one, I implore you to learn about each one of their worlds to a much higher degree. So with HHS, understand the FDA approval process for new medical devices. With weather, understand that they share this data with multiple people. How do they share it actively? Understand what their product is and how to actually wrap a solution around it. Then work with your vendor partners like Checkpoint and create products and solutions that will actually solve their problems. Don't check a box for them. Make sure that you show them what the bigger picture is all about. And that's my 2 cents.
So your Checkpoint is advising not checking the boxes.
Yes.
Is that what I just heard? Okay. I just want to make sure I understood and I was listening.
You check the points, sir.
There you go.
Okay, so actually, let's rewind and I'll just go down the line again. So Paul, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this notion of immediate impact and making sure that you have trust and other interoperability. standards. I mean, how can this group actually specifically help you solve what you see as the emerging problems? I mean, you're not just focused on helping agencies with compliancy, but the cybersecurity framework and the rest of the stuff you've put out is a great template for not just the federal government, but other missions and organizations. So, I mean, we had a little bit of illusion, and I'm gonna get back to Daniel on this notion of how does the industry interact, because I mean we talked a little bit about it at lunch. But how can this group help you get better?
There's a bunch of ways. The easiest is what we've already talked about, which is to participate when we are actually developing this material, and at least in the group that I'm in, we are telegraphing much more earlier in the process that we're actually doing something rather than surprising you all with a draft out of nowhere. If for some reason you can't participate, I have a little less patience for that, but I value the input no matter when it comes. So don't be afraid to let us know after we've done something when it's gone final that we've missed something. I very much believe that my role is much more of a listener than necessarily a thought leader that has to get it all right on my own. We've talked about the NCCOE and participating there. I think there's maybe two other areas. I look to my federal peers to help develop our pipeline of work that we should be focusing on. But I think industry has a lot to say there as well. You guys are also embedded with these agencies and know their sticky problems and can help us determine what it is that we should take on next and take on behalf of these guys and on behalf of the customers you serve. And then this is kind of tactical, but I think important, is we don't want to fatigue industry. We don't want to fatigue our partners here. But we have to also be much more reactive and proactive and responsive to the environment that we have here in the cyber domain. So what is the right pace and the right mechanisms for us to move the needle in terms of guidelines and standards so we're staying ahead of the curve, not behind it, without you guys having to dedicate a whole division to keeping up with NIST updates, and the same with these guys. But certainly, I think the annual review is not going to cut it anymore. We've got to be much more nimble, and I'm still kind of searching for that sweet spot of how often and what mechanism.
Yeah, and my sort of unsolicited advice on this one is that don't complain if their standards don't hit what you want if you didn't if you didn't participate in writing the standards. Sorry, if you waited until that's already out on the street, you've waited too long. They are a beautifully transparent organization, and Paul and his colleagues just do a great job of trying to put this stuff out. I mean, they really want to hear your input, so don't complain if it doesn't hit what you want. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
you can't say that, I can.
I can. I mean, like I said, it's sort of annoying after the fact to say you missed X, Y, and Z. Well, where were you the past year? But
right.
we still want to hear it, and this won't be an uncomfortable conversation if you came to me with that. And then, as much as I want these guys to do it, I think you guys are in a much better position. If there's something going on in the market, domestically or internationally, that already answers the mail, let us know so we don't recreate it in the government sector. We should not be a special snowflake where we don't have to be.
Speaking about special snowflakes, Mr. Gross.
What was the question?
Not yet. We're going to get to the question. No, but I mean, you've outlined 8 great themes really, which is influencing the way that some of these larger activities and procurements are happening. And it's very clear, sorry, you don't get to ask him about what this next round of CDM looks like. That's sort of off limits because it is procurement sensitive. But I mean, when you look at it, the question would be, how can these agency cybersecurity requirements get better informed, and how can they actually help you influence both Paul and the stuff your procurement shop is running?
So two key thoughts here. One is, I want to make sure everybody understands we're not developing anything anymore, okay? We need to leverage what's in commercial industry. We buy all commercial tools, all commercial capabilities. Anybody that thinks that we are developing our own capabilities is just wrong. So everything we do is dependent on industry providing us a set of capabilities. So we have to be able to leverage that. To leverage that, I don't want to be stuck in technology lock-in to individual companies because nobody's going to be able to provide us with a total solution. We need common APIs. We need common mapping. We need common data sets. We need things that the industry agrees to. Industry, you need to get together and help us figure that out, how we're going to get there in the cyberspace. We've done it in other spaces. We need to do it in the cyberspace. And if it's through NIST, that's great. That's what they're here for. So I really push that. The other thing I think is really critical, and it was briefly talked about here, you need to help us get to mission outcomes, okay? To tell you the truth, I'm agnostic on tools. I have a mission outcome that I need to get to, and you need to help me figure out how I can bring things together to get to that mission outcome, as opposed to just saying, I have this tool, you use it, you're going to do everything for me. It doesn't really do me any good. I'm going to say something that's really strange to hear from a person that acquires and engineers things. We need to get to what I consider operationalization. We spent years acquiring tools, implementing tools. We did not spend years figuring out how to use them to meet the mission outcome. And what I need to focus on right now and get people to focus on is how do you use that data? How do you use the tools that we have, not just to be able to use the tool, but to figure out what your risks are, where you have problems, how to fix those problems, where we have enterprise risks, not just within an individual system, but how it relates to our total enterprise, and look at a broader set of things that we have to deal with. I think that's really critical, and we need help to do that, okay? It's going to require a lot of thought, a lot of brain power, and we don't just have to do it for the government. We need to do that for the nation and the industries in the nation that need those kind of capabilities as well.
Can I interject for one thing
yeah.
as a vendor? The single largest impact statement I could make around what Martin just said is that around 90% of the incidents that my team worked globally, the customer already had the controls in place, but either didn't turn them on, didn't know how to turn them on, or didn't know how to use them effectively. 90% of all 1,800 incidents that we've worked so far this year. That's an insane number.
Basic cyber hygiene, training, how to use it, how to look for risks.
Exactly right.
Sorry, when Martin and I were both that term cyber hygiene got bandied about a lot, and some of our colleagues did not like it, and I think many of us like it a great deal. And just recognize that this sea change is not happening just in the civilian agencies. I mean, there's true talk of the military using best commercial crypto for tactical systems. I mean, so this notion of buying best-of-breed commercial products is going across all of the federal space. And inside of this whole organization called DHS, there's a whole series of working groups that has put together some incredible best practice standards based on the stuff that NIST has been doing. Look at the fintech world as a good example of interoperability and vulnerability management.
So I want to also point out one thing. It's not just about buying products, because there's a great push for managed services, okay? In the IT modernization report, there's a big push for SOC as a service, to be able to provide SOC as a service to smaller agencies. With what we did with the E3A component of Einstein, that's a managed service, okay? We went to vendors, they provide that capability for us. We don't do it ourselves. So there is a big push to say we're willing, to use managed service, not just buy products.
Right. And I think I'm going to do a bit of a follow-on with Doug on this whole notion of managed services and common operating pictures, because I think part of your responsibility is also running the Security Operations Center for NOAA. And I mean, there's this notion of how do you have a common operating picture and to ensure data integrity, because the worst thing, as you were alluding to, in that whole confidentiality, integrity, availability pyramid of data management, sorry, I mean, integrity, your data integrity has to be there, so.
Right, and so NOAA has our Security Operations Center in West Virginia. We have our security operations, our insert, our tools and staff at the data center. We also operate the Department of Commerce Enterprise SOC as well, and there's an initiative underway to do some more leveraging of that solution for other bureaus in commerce so that we can maybe eliminate some redundancy and improve our visibility across the department in what's happening. Currently, we see something like 25 billion events a week, and that is just a massive amount of information to get through. So automation and machine learning and all these types of things that are out there are things that we're going to have to be able to leverage to help our analysts make sense out of what really is important in all of that noise. I heard someone say that finding the really meaningful events in the deluge of information is like looking for something from space. You know, these deep listening, there's just noise, and so you're trying to find the signal in the noise. NOAA has implemented our own TICAPs. We've been assessed by DHS and scored very well in the control assessments. The Department of Commerce is also looking to leverage our TICAP solution for the bureaus. We've implemented a nationwide transport network to move our data around. We move massive amounts of data around and to our data centers where we're doing modeling for hurricane forecasts, et cetera. So I think a key, and I think Martin touched on this earlier, is you have to understand your information flows. And you have to, for a federal agency, we have primary mission essential functions or mission essential functions. And so understanding that flow of information is critically important. The idea of a common operating picture is, I think, important as well, because from a cyber perspective, you're looking for events or whatnot. From an operations perspective, you're focused on providing the service. And so you have events happening in your operations that it's not apparent to you that you may have an attack going on. And so you need to have that holistic view of your service delivery, what you're seeing in terms of threats, what are your vulnerabilities, what really is your risk, and ultimately, how does it affect the information flow for your critical functions? And typically, the boundaries are where you have trouble because, you know, what comes in and what's going out, you need to have a really clear understanding of that. NOAA is actually doing a lot of work in understanding those mappings. We're trying to address weaknesses that we've had in the past, and you get a lot of insightful things by understanding that. So the advice that I would give you, I think it's been mentioned before, is you need to understand your customer's mission. You need to understand what's important to NOAA, because what's important to NOAA is going to be different than HHS or another agency. We have difficult issues that we need you to come to us with solutions that represent the problems we have because of the missions that we have. So you need to do your homework when you come and talk to us about how your solution addresses our mission requirements. And again, I think that Martin's right. Interoperability is key. NOAA is not going to go invest in R&D for some new cyber solution. We are going to leverage what's the best in the industry. We want it to be adaptable and interchangeable with other solutions. We don't want to have to re-engineer something every time we implement it. So from a cyber operations perspective, address the basics, understand our mission, come to us with good solutions.
So I'll say it one more time. If you're selling services or tools and they don't have a nice REST API that I can hook into and get access to that data, you're going to have a real hard time in the federal space. Nothing is more of a turnoff for us when we have some market research going on and we say, this is really cool and awesome. How can I hook in and move that over into a platform X? And they say, oh yeah, that's on the roadmap down the way. It's almost a deal breaker, and it's like, thank you, moving on. If you don't have an open data mindset and the ability to share the outcomes that your technology or services are producing, go and design that right now. If you haven't heard it enough on this side of the table, I'm reinforcing that. Additionally, as you look at services and technologies and tools, most, if not all, of the agencies are in a transition phase right now. I would love to say we're all happily in the cloud and chugging right along, but that is certainly not the case. So what you provide to us needs to be able to give me parity in terms of capability in both my cloud environments, where I may be doing DevSecOps or some of the new approaches to deploying IT, but also my traditional, it's brick and mortar virtualized in my data center type of environments. If you can't deploy in both and you can't show me risk parity across both, we're going to have a hard conversation. Moving forward, we talk about CDM, and we talk about actually a larger picture. How do I get continuous risk visibility in my organization? Looking at the services and the capabilities you provide and looking across the cybersecurity framework and understanding where your strength is and where your weakness is going to be foundational for moving product or services in the federal space. Because most, if not all, of the CISOs right now, we have the CSF framework in front of us and we know where our gaps are. We know where we're investing right now. We know where we need to invest in the future. If you can't map to the cybersecurity framework, you're going to have a harder conversation with us. And speaking of cloud, when we have cloud providers, most of us are familiar with FedRAMP, and we're like, oh yeah, Amazon's got it, AWS and Microsoft, et cetera. The number of times we have vendors come to us and say, we're FedRAMPed. We're like, okay, that's cool, show us. They're like, well, we're on AWS. No, you're not FedRAMPed. No, you're not. That's another one of those, pull the pin out and throw it, because it's going to be a rough ride. And specifically security tool vendors, I'm looking at you guys. The number of security tool vendors that come to us and I ask that question, well, talk to me about cloud. You have a cloud component, whether it's your machine learning or AI. You want me to put my sensitive data in there, potentially vulnerability information about my enterprise. Talk to me about the security of that platform. Oh, well, it's a security tool. Yeah, I understand that, but there's a technology stack under it. Talk to me about the security of that. Yeah, we're going to have to get back to you on that. Not a good answer, not a good place to be. If you have a cloud component that is crucial to delivering your service or delivering your technology, FedRAMP, okay? It's non-negotiable in most cases. It's a big issue at HHS, and HHS is one of the most adamant about making sure that any cloud service or provider that we bring in meets the FedRAMP requirements. Understanding a little bit about, Doug over here mentioned the tie caps. Make sure your technology plays well with trusted internet connections. Make sure that your services can play well. And not just in being able to route traffic and authentication, but also, especially with authentication, you need to make sure that you can handle advanced mature authentication. The number of security tools I get that are like, we're username and password. Like, no, that doesn't work for me. Everything else in my environment, I require PIV. I require a derived credential. Anything you're selling to me, especially on the cybersecurity side, better be able to handle at least that level of authentication. And so a lot of what I've discussed here is just, as pointed out earlier, it's common cyber hygiene. And unfortunately, I think that especially when we're talking about selling cyber to the government, we're very good at our specific areas, our niche areas about what we do and who we are. We may be amazing threat hunting teams, great penetration testing, amazing vulnerability tools, but oftentimes when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of, well, talk to me about your operations because I really want to buy services, not so much tools. Talk to me about the resilience and assurance around that service. Conversations sometimes get a little wonky and sideways. So be ready to talk about that. And for some people, it's a shift because we have been buying a lot of tools in the past. But at least for us, that's shifting, and what it means is we need to know more about the resilience and operations of the providers. Thank you.
So Daniel, I want to feed off of what Steve just said.
Yep.
So cyber as a service.
Yeah.
Real, fake?
Real.
Should these guys look at it? I mean, what should they be looking for, and how can this audience help them get to cyber as a service, however we define cyber as a service?
So
Sorry, Paul, that's your job.
Okay. Okay, so cyber as a service. So look, you've got your traditional models like SOC as a service and other security services that do the monitoring and the management and so on and so forth. I would say that industry's been around for 20 years in one way or another, and it is maturing just like everything else, right? And now it's becoming more cloudy, more holistic, a little more big data-y, and so on and so forth. The short answer is there's a couple of really great solutions that can give SOC as a service, which is just one tiny little element of the bigger thing we're talking about here. One area that I think we are struggling with, and it's actually the area that I provide services in, so if you need to talk to me, I'd love to talk to you, but specifically around is those advanced services, right? How do you offer those without having to deploy a person everywhere, right? Because right now, it's typically, cyber nerd like me shows up for a week, and then they're great, and everything's wonderful, and everything's terrific, and then I leave, right? And now the customer has to try to figure out what the hell to do after I've left. That's a problem. So what we're working on is a set of services to be able to extend our capabilities into an environment to be able to offer those advanced services like threat hunting, for example, or adversary isolation, or whatever you want to call it. All of those advanced type services to be able to deal with those threats more aggressively. And we're seeing traction in those areas, and we see that growing. But there's other areas that I think other players would also be very interesting in, like virtual patching and vulnerability management. And the big one for me that I see is a large issue is no one actually knows how to use the cloud right? So do you guys remember some of the vulnerabilities around S3 buckets inside of AWS? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? So Accenture and a couple of the big consulting agencies put data in the cloud and then forgot that maybe someone pushed the any allow with no password, right? So even moving to the cloud introduces all of these new variables that are very difficult to get your head around. And then you see a lot of vendors create solutions around that. My concern, though, is that sometimes vendors are moving at such a speed, they're forgetting the basics that everyone else has talked about. You still need all of those framework components.
Although I'm going to go back to the basics, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure some of the questions you all have get asked, and hopefully that you get answers. So there should be someone with the microphone.
I just
Okay.
want to say one quick thing before we go to the questions. It will be quick, and I'd get killed if I didn't bring this up. Privacy and privacy as a service is very important to NIST and looking at cybersecurity. We have developed a framework that is the CIA triad equivalent in privacy. And if you can't talk about the way those two interact, it's also kind of our deal breaker. And a hint, privacy is not data security. So look at that and make sure you can talk about our privacy triad as well as our security triad.
Okay, we got time for at least 2, maybe 3 questions before we get pull off the stage hook. So guy in the blue shirt right there, since you're the first one I saw with the hand up.
So I keep hearing SOC as a service come up, and I know that was in the IT modernization report. From a federal agency perspective, there's been a resistance towards SOC as a service. At least we have seen that. How do we overcome that? What is it? What are the keywords or what are the messages we can take to them to help them overcome what seems to be dig a heels a little bit? And I don't think it's anything malicious. I think there's something there that we just haven't been able to overcome. What do we do to get over that for all those agencies? You guys work in those agencies. You probably know what is going on in their heads. We don't. We can't figure it out.
Yeah, so I'll lead into this one. I'll say the number one reason there's hesitation is, as Martin pointed out earlier, risk is an equation: vulnerability, threat, impact, likelihood. And the challenge is a lot of SOC providers come to us and they'll say, we'll find all the vulnerabilities in your enterprise. Great, we have wonderful threat intelligence, cool. They don't know a damn thing about our mission, nor do they really have an interest, nor can they speak to it. You're missing the majority component of that risk equation if you can't speak to the mission, because when that vulnerability comes up or that threat comes up, it's going to go ding on the screen, and the SOC is going to have no idea how critical it is to our enterprise. That's one of the major issues we've seen in the past.
Or trust. If you provide me a service and you don't provide me visibility into the metrics that you're collecting, that's a problem.
I would also say look at the contract vehicle, because a lot of primes have SOCs under their mandate for a contract. So if it's built in, good luck changing it.
The other side has a motivation not to let you in.
That's exactly right. So you need to look at the contract vehicle, and maybe that's a 3-year plan instead of a 1-year hit.
Okay, next question.
So part of the vendor community here wants to know how to talk better with you in terms of their capabilities. What's the one message that you hear from the vendor communities over and over again and you just roll your eyes and immediately dismiss?
I think I already told it, my tool is going to solve all your problems. And you come and sell it, you say, I've got a tool. Okay, that's great. But we talked about here, you don't relate it to our mission, you don't relate it to my mission outcome, and you come tell me a tool without looking at what we currently have and where it would fit in and how we could effectively use it. And not just from a tool perspective, but how we can use it in our mission to get the mission outcome of getting better availability, getting better protection, better privacy, all those type of things. How are we going to use it? Okay? And a lot of people come in and tell me, well, what you're doing here is all wrong. You should just do what I do instead. And I ask them, well, it's basically the same thing. It's just a different tool. Yeah, but mine's better. I mean, but that's what we hear.
Yeah.
That's what we hear constantly.
I'll add one little vendor spin if you don't mind. We've spent about 3 years working with DHS and NSA on one specific program, document sanitization, okay? It's been 3 years of going back and forth, just working on that one function. And I finally feel, just this year, that we've got all the requirements that they had into a product that would actually be sellable. 3 years.
I'll add, we at NIST, again, I said we don't buy, but I promise you, I talk to everyone that is. And, you know, I've got now a good partnership with a lot of agencies. I'm trying to roll out solutions, and I'll be the first one to talk to the vendors before they even do. They'll say, did you talk to NIST? Did you talk to Paul? And we'll have a very robust dialogue. Again, I want to learn what we can do better. They want to learn how they can comply. We tell them what they need to change, and then they'll meet with that agency and not change a damn thing. And that's a quick way to be disqualified.
So, yeah, and don't waste their time when you go in the door. I think I would say that as a DISA senior, I remember too many times when I would have a half-hour block or an hour-long block for a meeting, and the vendor finally got to something interesting at the last 5 minutes. And it just frustrates the heck out of everyone involved, because they could have probably made a sale, but they didn't know what they didn't know what the mission set was. So we've got time for one more question and one quasi-commercial. And okay, I've got a book. IMIX has been gracious enough. There are about 100 copies floating around, pre-signed. I think the boxes are in the back, or there's at least one box in the back. And at the reception, if you need me to personalize it, if you really care, I'll be down there. I'll look for the big sign. But yeah, so there are. So it's not even sell. There are copies for you for free. So okay, last question, please. Anyone? Okay.
All right, it's a follow-up. How are you solving the gatekeeper choke point problem to that mission information, the data about what tools you currently have?
Okay, so I think the question was, there's a gatekeeper problem. You mean about allowing vendors to come in the door, or which part of the gate?
How are you solving getting that information available to vendors and systems integrators who may not be currently embedded with you?
Okay.
So I'll say from our perspective, we liberally abuse the RFI process. Our contracting officers hate us, but at least from our perspective, there's rarely anything that we put on the street that hasn't been through an RFI process at least once. And so, you know, any good acquisition shop internally should be monitoring that. But oftentimes here again, you have to train them because they might be looking for specific tools or outcomes when we're talking about services and visibility. And if they're not able to make that leap and say, oh, you're not looking for a product, you're looking for a service with an outcome, they might miss opportunities.
And real-world example, should be an RFP out in the street any day now for NOAA's National Cybersecurity Center. So we were looking for good ideas through that RFP process.
Besides the RFIs, I mean, they have forecast industry days. They've got a whole Exhibit 300, so you can see where they're spending money, and you look at those things. You also can put in unsolicited proposals to say, okay, this is what we think your problem is, and sorry, you have to do some thinking about it, and that at times is really tough in the vendor community. As one, I will say that. But I mean, think through their problems. I mean, you have to be cautious on not disclosing all of your secret sauce. because once it moves over to the government can use it. So you just have to do that fine line, but there's a process in virtually every federal organization to go and ask for a meeting to talk about a specific issue. Now, it may be for a while. I suspect most of their calendars would look like my old calendar, which is blocked out every 15 minutes. And yeah, sorry, that's just the op tempo. Okay, last pithy statements, 30-second, get off the stage. What should these guys think about when they leave this venue? So let's go the other way around and start with the industry guy. Standards guys have to think more.
I have to think on my feet here. I think we've already said it a million times. Know who you're talking to, understand the mission, understand the focus, understand the threats that they face, because not each agency has the same threats, and apply it, and get to know them. Trusted advisor. That is, if anything you could do, become their trusted advisor in one capacity or another.
I'll say figure out what ponds they swim in. They're in various training circles, they're in various information sharing circles, government, private partnership type of organizations. Figure out where your market lives and figure out where your target audience lives and get into that lake, get into that world. It's going to open your eyes to the challenges they face. It may open your eyes to new business opportunities. And it does take a little bit of time and research on your part to figure that out, but I think it's well worth it.
And how do we get that common operating picture across various cloud vendors, physical data centers, hybrid cloud, so that we can see the total picture of what we're trying to manage and protect?
Like we said, look at our mission outcome and look at the big picture, just not where your little piece is, but how it fits into the big picture for us. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I think I was already pithy earlier. So.
You were pithy. Okay.
Yeah.
So can we at least give the speakers a round of applause? So thank you.